If you spend too much time looking back, you're going to become salty. The past has so many benefits, and looking back at where we've come from to see where we are now, or listening to stories of others through history and figuring out ways not to repeat history can be very beneficial. But at the same time, when we decide to stay in the past, especially when we know we've been told we feel the importance of moving forward, we can end up getting stuck in the past. The perfect biblical example of this is Lot's wife in Genesis 19. The angels of the Lord came to Sodom and they saw kindness in Lot. He accommodated them in his house, and they told him that we're about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and y'all need to leave. You need to get out of here because we're going to light this place up. And the one stipulation was, when you leave, go to the mountains and do not look back. So when Lot, his wife, and his two daughters were leaving, they got out of there. They went up to a city that wasn't going to be affected. And when all of God's wrath was being rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah in the form of sulfur and fire, Lot's wife looked back. She looked back, and as she did, she became a pillar of salt. And when you think about this in our societal context of right now, the term salty comes to mind, right? You know, when you're looking back, when you're thinking about something, when you're bitter, people will say, you're so salty. And another thought about salt is when salt is used in food, it's used to preserve things, right? So you can get like salt fish, salted cod. Salt is used to preserve meats. It keeps things in a stasis, in a state in which they were, and it preserves them there. And then when you think back to Lot's wife, they were leaving Sodom and Gomorrah. They were told that it was going to be destroyed, but something about that place was still tied to her, or she was still tied to something about that place. And this connection to that place caused her to look back at it, even though she shouldn't have. And what happened when she looked back? Her fate became the same as those who were still there, right? Sulfur was being rained down, fire was being rained down in that place. She was far away from it, but she still ended up being turned into a pillar of salt, as if she was in that space where sulfur was being rained down. And that is something that often happens to us when we leave a space, when we move forward, but our mind stays there. When our mind stays in the places we're not supposed to be, we become preserved in that space. We become preserved in the emotions that we experienced at that time, be it rage, be it anger, be it jealousy, be it sadness. And we are salty and stuck, preserved in those spaces. And as I said in the beginning, it's important to know when to look back and what to gain from looking back. But there's also a wisdom in the amount of time we should spend in history. Because if we spend too much time in history, we are not going to be able to create our current times or move into the future that God has allocated for us. So, yes, learn, yes, go back, but then stop it at some point. This year, well, in December of 2023, when I was preparing to enter into 2024, I had this really strong feeling that there are certain stories, there are certain past experiences and traumas that I no longer need to take with me into this year. And not taking them with me into this year doesn't mean I'm forgetting them, but it means I'm not going to, out of my mouth, consciously just talk about these things the way I once did. And some of these stories are on my YouTube. Some of these stories didn't make it here, but there are things that didn't feel good, didn't bring me happiness, didn't bring me joy. And I started to realize that no matter the way that I spoke about it, for the most part, even though I said I was past it, going back into the past and having discussions about these things and these people was making me feel preserved in those spaces. You know, when you tell a story about something that happened to you, and before you know it, your energy shifts. You're telling that story and you find yourself getting angry. It's like your body is physically going back to the moment where that thing took place. And in you going back to that place emotionally, it starts to trigger your body to feel as if you're back there, even though you're not. And that is not good. You don't want to relive anger and trauma and hatred and all of these feelings that don't glorify God, that don't put you in a good place, and that also hinder your ability to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't mean access. I say this all the time, but forgiveness means letting go. And it's very hard to let go when we constantly preserve ourselves in those spaces where those things were so fresh and raw to us. So this is a little reminder to know when to look forward and to be cautious of spending too much time in the past, because when you're no longer there physically, you also want to leave that place mentally, because our minds can attach us to places that we no longer physically are. And our body and our mind, if they're not on the same page, our mind usually takes precedent. So if you are constantly putting yourself back into places where God has liberated you from, where God has removed you from, your body is going to fall in line with your mind. And I don't want you to be anywhere where you're not supposed to be. God has done so much for us and he's moved us forward. So we should not be salty and keep ourselves stuck in those places, because in doing that, we are taking up the brain space, the grace and the capacity that God has given us for our seasons right now, as well as our seasons in the future. And if we spend too much time stuck in the past, we are going to be playing catch up with our present, trying to get to our future, because we spent too much time where we shouldn't have been. So my prayer for you today is that you find the strength to look forward, and that you fight against the temptation to go back to places where you wish you never were, places where nothing good happened, and places where you weren't honored, respected, or treated well. I pray that as you look forward, that God will continue to heal you, and that the physical space of you moving in time from the places where you were hurt to the places where you are now will be matched with the mental space that you will put between those memories of these times where you weren't treated well and the places where you are today. And as God gives you the grace to do that, I really encourage you to also have the strength to pull yourself forward. Yes, those stories might be good. They might be so interesting. When people hear those stories, they're like, wow. And that feeling of empathy or that feeling of pride in knowing that you're no longer there, especially when you receive it from others, can feel really good. But remember that God has done it for you, and that you don't want the attachment to the past, positive or negative, to keep you so stuck that you're not getting all of the good stuff that's coming for you next. So I hope that this really helps you. And if you like this video, you can give it a like. If you love this video, you could subscribe to my channel so that you can hear more of these perspectives and really strengthen your walk with God with applicable ways that we can apply these Bible principles to our everyday lives. And if you think that a friend of yours could really use this message, I would really implore you to forward this message to them. And I want you to continue to be kind to yourself, because you're a work in progress, making progress. And I'll speak to you again soon. Bye.